Hello again. Welcome to another installment of the Inquisitors. I hope you and yours have been reasonably well in all ways in the wild times of 2026. It's probably going to get wilder. Tis what it is. I'm Gladius Veritatis, being joined today by my partner in crime, Matthew. But just so we all remember that in the saner legal realm, if there is no victim, there's no crime, sort of thing. So I use the term partner in crime loosely. So today I believe we're going to touch upon, among other things, a very classic understanding related to reality, the ether. I personally am interested in the subject, but have been busy and then a little sick and didn't do my due diligence to prepare for the topic. But we'll make it through anyway. But why don't you give us a few introductory remarks, Matthew, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, well, first of all, there's a great resource for this. Once again, I have to give a cautious recommendation for this channel, Austin Whitsitt, over on YouTube and other platforms. He goes by Whitsitt Gets It. He's a good flat Earth proponent, but he also talks a lot about the modern science establishment. He goes into the details of tearing down things like the theory of relativity, and he talks about the ether, and he talks about quantum mechanics and all these things, and he goes into more detail than a lot of other flat Earth channels would. The man is very smart. He's not very good as far as being he's not a traditional Catholic. He's not even a Catholic. In fact, he's a bit anti-Catholic. I don't go to him for religious advice, but when it comes to young Earth and creationism and particularly the realm in which we live, he seems to be a pretty good source for that kind of stuff. And again, we have to go to the sources we have to go to. You're not going to get one perfect source that knows about everything. You're going to have to just this guy for your math, this guy for your science, this guy for your religion, and just source info where you have to get it from.
If I may insert one little nugget, I think it was a clip from Archbishop Sheen from his show years ago. And he was saying, if I'm wrong, it doesn't matter. It was, but it was some public Catholic figure saying that basically, there's not not one in a million people that hate the church. They hate what they wrongly think is the church.
Yeah,
and I think this was said well before Vatican II. And I only say that because although there was tons of, anti-Catholic propaganda before Vatican II, now that Vatican II has happened and what purports to be the Catholic Church is something that we all resist as well. If I meet somebody or I come across a resource who is clearly anti-Catholic, I have to take that with a grain of salt, because what a lot of them are objecting to is what puts itself forth to the world and most powerfully through the media as the Catholic Church. And there's a lot about that is objectionable. I mean, we object to it ourselves. It's just a very weird time where that sort of attitude may not necessarily be such a clear-cut bad sign for somebody as it was in the days of 70 years ago or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, God will have to judge, where they went wrong, if they were choosing themselves.
If they love truth, I think it will that part of the puzzle will also eventually be clarified and presented to them, and the love of truth hopefully will prevail with God's grace. But it's a very tricky time when, most of the things in the world, buildings, whatever, books that have the name Catholic on them are absolutely not actually Catholic. They're utterly modernist.
Yeah, that's you have to wonder. Sometimes it's an excuse, sometimes it's real. I just heard there was one guy that claimed that he grew up Catholic and that he left the church, and he basically said, I will paraphrase, when the scandals about the priests came out, a couple of decades ago, with what some priests were doing to boys and stuff.
Sure.
That was his reason. Now God will judge. Is he just does he have an excuse or not? In fact, the man went on to basically admit to certain vices that he was guilty of.
Sure.
So it kind of makes you wonder: are you just rejecting God and rejecting Catholicism because they tell you can't do that? And I think, it's my opinion. I think a lot of, again, only God knows, and I'm not out to judge any particular person. That's God's territory. I'm not going to step. Sure. I'm not going to tread on God's jurisdiction here.
Yeah, talk about a complicated operation anyway.
Yeah,
figuring out yourself first, and good luck with that.
Yeah, we can't see the secrets of hearts, and that's what it's like with all these truthers. It's interesting how someone can have so much truth, and then they go just totally off in left field about something else. So, I mentioned Whitsitt here, Austin Whitsitt, with Whitsitt Gets It. He's very good for, young Earth and the shape of this realm that we're in, and talking about the false scientism establishment and just picking apart the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the illogical fallacies. He's a very smart man, but then he has some very vague Christianity about him. He's he believes in the Book of Enoch, about the watchers that came down, the fallen spirit that came down here and took wives from among the women, among the children of men, and had hybrid beings that were the giants. He believes that. So he's a bit crazy in that department.
The Bible talks about giants.
Yeah, and see, the problem is he doesn't have the Catholic Church to tell him this is wrong, this is right. He's like someone told him not to trust the Catholic Church. So now he goes off the track into believing and giving credence to things like the Book of Enoch and these other people online who talk about this topic. And so, he gets a few things wrong. Also, another prominent person I have to mention is Eric Dubay, who's done great service to the world in reviving debate on the topic of this realm that we live in. What he did was he read a bunch of turn of the last century stuff from the late 1800s when the topic of the earth was hotly debated. There was a lot of prominent writers and things. And apparently a lot of it kind of got buried and lost for a while because there was, for example, the Flat Earth Society, which I heard of when I was a kid. It was always a subject of mockery. And apparently I didn't know this until I studied the Earth topic for real, that it was taken over and co-opted. It was basically a joke. Like the man in charge, he had like this piece of rock he carried around and claimed that he almost sailed off the edge of the world, and he hung on to this rock or something. It was ridiculous. And this guy, it was a big joke to him. And he took over this whole movement and like this whole website and stuff. And there's a lot of intrigue there. Like I heard that there was a man who actually had a bunch of information, and I think he got his house burnt down or something. So there was some funny business going on. And that's probably why it got kind of buried for a while. And of course, thanks to the internet, 2014, it kind of had a revival. But again, I have to say that apparently it was Eric Dubay who was one of the main characters. And apparently he spent a lot of time coming up with videos and like making a real good case. And then he released it all at once, all over social media, which was very small at the time. There wasn't much competition back then. So he released this all at once. And of course, you had a bunch of shills come out, a bunch of controlled opposition trying to, moderate the damage. And it was very big back then. It came on CathInfo. In fact, it was so big that I had to put it in its own subforum because people were complaining. And at the time, I didn't see any reason to squash it, but I also didn't see any reason to support it. So I'm like, okay, my people are getting annoyed by this. I'll put it in a sub forum, and when you post in that topic, it won't show up on the main page. It won't show up in the recent threads. Now, that's what I even did.
Right, so it's not
so
dominating the feed.
And so, but my point is, this Eric Dubé character, he recently identified himself as an agnostic. He is stuck, and his mind can't get past the problem of evil, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, he can't understand how a good God would create a world like this, where we have to die, and where little kids have to suffer with cancer, and where animals have to eat each other and stuff like that. He's like, a God could have done it. He could have done it in a better way that wasn't so painful. Da, 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 da. And he just can't get past that in his little mind. So he's not going to believe in God, in that God, the God that we believe in. But other than that,
which is really just putting off the question, right? Well, okay, if you don't, then give me your alternative.
He's basically placing his goodness above God's goodness, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it.
He's just,
but he has contradictions because he mocks the idea of a world coming together by accident from random chance.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Against
everything about creation tells you there's a creator.
Yeah, and so that's why he doesn't call himself an atheist. He calls himself an agnostic. So he knows there's a creator, but that we can't know him or don't know him. That's his position. So he thinks it's ridiculous, and I agree that in the idea that this all couldn't just come together. If you walk through a woods and you find a fully assembled plane or a fully assembled car, you don't say, wow, those atoms came together quite marvelously. Well, wow, what do you know? Random chance is really something, isn't it? No, you'd say someone built this car, or someone built this plane. So he's logical that far, but then he
needs to read some Chesterton. Chesterton was agnostic, and he was a hell of a lot smarter than Dubé and any other agnostic I've ever come across. I mean, Chesterton had brains to burn and wrote it voluminously about a great many things and all different kinds of writings. And it takes some getting used to, but I mean, he's a brilliant dude. He's a great resource to anybody who's doubting, uncertain about some things. He presents things in a certain light that I think can be really appealing, especially to intelligent folks. Like, oh, wow, I never would have thought about it that way.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic, to digress a bit on the topic of apologetics, we all talk about knowing the faith and being good traditional Catholics that have the truth. Yet there's so many levels. There's so many foundations under where we stand. We have the whole truth of creation and God and religion and the true religion. We have all of it. We have the whole package. But think about all the different foundations that we stand upon. The fact that there's one God, the fact that God created a church, those kind of things. We should know how to get people to each of those stages so that when you meet someone who say he agrees with you on creation, so you're not going to argue with him about how evolution's nonsense. He agrees with you on that. Where you have to get him to is that there's a good God that can be known in his creation. That's what you have to argue with Eric Dubé about. And so we need to know these things because let me tell you, when you go out there in the world and you make friends with worldlings, whether you have coworkers, whether you have in-laws, whether you have friends, classmates, coworkers, whatever, you need to know each of these. You need to be able to recognize where they're at, and you need to know the arguments that you need to wield to tell them why they're wrong, because they are wrong. And yes, arguing, it's of questionable value. I mean, if someone's not in the mood to be converted, they're not going to convert. But you need to know the answers, because even if you don't want to argue with him, he's going to argue with you. And you don't want to be tempted by his errors. You want to know in the back of your mind that the Catholic Church has answers to all this. And that, for example, Greek philosophers already worked out that there is one God who must be.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say earlier. It's like, hey, Dubé, you think Aristotle just didn't know what he was talking about? He was able to, with fantastic precision and detail, demonstrate why God definitely that he exists. He's one. Has certain characteristics, and he was no dummy.
And what's interesting is after I watched the two videos by Austin Whitsitt on this topic of ether, just to kind of refresh my own memory on the topic, then I found this other video that he mentioned called Ethereal, the battle for heaven and earth. And right away, like in the first 15 minutes, they did say something against the Catholic Church, but I'm glad I didn't hit the stop button. I'm glad I kept watching, because later it made so many good points. It even criticized men like Eric Dubay, because it mentioned by name all the different kinds of New Age. And one of the things was Kundalini yoga. And that's the kind of yoga that he practices. Eric Dubay is a practitioner of Kundalini yoga.
Kundalini?
Kundalini, yeah. Kundalini yoga. And he just recently moved to Thailand. And he spent a lot of time in the East. So he's a very big fan of yoga and the Eastern religion.
It's a dangerous part of the world for correct thinking about God and about reality. I mean, to break it down and kind of borrow from Chesterton, right? Because he explains a lot of these differences in things like heretics and then orthodoxy and then the everlasting man in particular. He mentions a lot of stuff in all his writings, but those three are very good and very good to be read in that order, right? Because that's the order they were written. I think it was like 1905, 1908, by which point I think he had become an Anglican or something. And Everlasting Man was like 1921 or something. And by that point, he had become a Catholic. But in some of those earlier ones, he makes it clear that basically, the Eastern way of thinking and why it's so antithetical to the Western mind is that the Eastern way of thinking is very dark. And the fundamental, just to grossly oversimplify it, existence is the problem.
Yeah.
They treat existence as the problem to be solved. Whereas the Western mind, it's more like existence is a gift. And the problem or the question is, what are you going to do with it? And it's just a very fundamentally different way of looking at things. And the pinnacle in the East, in one form or another, is always to basically be dissolved into nothing. That is the peak. Whereas in the West, obviously, it is to be divinized, right? To be elevated and united to the divinity himself.
Yeah,
those are radically different ways of looking at
it. I find it interesting that these men who maybe have a few, I wouldn't say screws loose, but they got a few things wrong, but they've specialized in certain topics that they've really gotten to the bottom of, and they have a good way of explaining it, and they have a lot to offer. So you need to go to these guys to learn just certain things, and then you leave them and go back to other people for your other subjects. And that's the way Bishop Williamson operated the seminary too. He invited people in to teach on certain subjects. He didn't bring them in to be a professor at the seminary. He only brought them in to talk about very limited topics. And some of these people he brought in were controversial. I think one of them was a rabbi, but he was there to talk about the Jews. So, I mean, who better to teach us about the Jews? Maybe, well, like that brother Nathaniel, for example. He would be like that. I think he's Eastern Orthodox now or something like that.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. So he's not, you don't want him for religion. Don't go to him for your religion, but he could tell you about the Jews and how they think and what they teach each other, because he was one. So he comes right out of that. So yeah, go to him to learn about that. And that's kind of how I operate when it comes to learning about these things. So in these videos, he talks about how the modern scientific, let's call it scientism, which is a twisted version of science. I mean, science is a honorable thing that a Catholic could do to learn about God's creation. That's real science. Scientism is a materialistic worldview whereby you believe that everything in the world either is measurable and physical, or it does not exist. So things like the soul or intuition or memory or dreams, all those things, you could measure them somehow. It's all in the physical
Let's
realm.
say ideas. I mean,
Yeah.
it always blows me away because all the bogus ideas that are like what you're talking about are themselves immaterial,
Yeah.
immeasurable. It's an idea.
Yeah. How can you measure an idea? If I have an idea, can you think you could
just
measure
blew
that?
up that blows up your own bogus theory. You know what I mean? It's just end of discussion.
Yeah. So it's this whole materialistic worldview. So the first thing to consider when talking about the ether is what is the alternative? We have this alternative now. I think he calls it atomism, the whole idea of atoms. I remember at the seminary learning kind of the worldview or the cosmology. What we're talking about here is cosmology, which is the Greek for talking about the cosmos. Cosmos and logos, talking about the cosmos or the universe that we live in. And so if you go to a seminary, a traditional seminary, and you get cosmology, what you're going to get is St. Thomas Aquinas talking about hylomorphism, which is hylo is, I think, form, and morph is morphism is shape, and hylo is matter or whatever. So it basically means matter and form. Hylomorphism is matter and formism. It's everything has matter and form. And so form is the pure potential, and then the matter is what gives it existence or whatever. So it's a different way of a different worldview, a different way of looking at the world. Now, that one of the first things all the public school kids are raising their hands and asking about is, where do the atoms come in? Well, what my professor said was that's basically the material cause. You're talking about the material aspect of this world, the individual atoms, and that's kind of where I left it. But actually, looking back, now I'm thinking, I don't think there's any need for the atoms at all.
No, I was about to say that I think that whole avenue is part of the scientism. I don't think there's any proof.
Exactly. It's kind of like if someone was teaching you evolution and you said, Father, where does God come in with evolution? Well, God must have created the Big Bang, and then everything else I said is true. Actually, now we know no, it isn't, because you can't. Random chance is not going to develop information, for example, like to create information for a wing on a fish. A wing is a whole different bit of information. You have to design that wing. It's not just going to happen. And so the true answer is it doesn't fit in anywhere. And what they basically did with these atoms is so many places, it's almost like a substitute for the ether or for hylomorphism or something like that, because it's omnipresent. It's prime matter. They're looking for that same kind of thing, only they want it to be scientific. They want it to be more pseudoscientific. So it's everywhere. You can't measure it. Well, they talk about dark matter. They talk about atoms are 99.999% empty space. And there's so much. If you look into it, it's all a bunch of psychobabble. I mean, it's none of it's really scientific.
It's oddly totally unverifiable nonsense.
Yeah, one of the other points though that the author makes is that the ether is he said it's a logical framework. It's not something we can actually measure. So so you can't even call it pseudoscientific, because to say that it's pseudoscientific means that you're trying to make it into science. You're trying to measure it, or say that it's something physical, but it's actually not. It's more of a framework. But on the other hand, it has to exist. I guess what his point is there is existence beyond the purely physical realm. There is another realm, the metaphysical, which interacts with this realm. So things like light or energy, magnetism, radio waves, just the whole electromagnetic spectrum, those things are different modalities of the ether. They're different perturbations of the ether. So, for example, he says that a wave is something you do, not something you hold, or not something you have. I can't hand you a wave. I can wave to you. I can create a wave in the water. I can create a wave in the air that propagates a sound wave. Like I'm talking right now, I'm creating waves in the air, but you can't pick up one of those waves and hold it. It's not a thing. It's something in something else. It's something that is done by something. So, again, those are some really good points that most people don't stop and think about. and there's a lot to it. In this video, the first one I would recommend was called The Aether. I think that's probably the better of the two. He has kind of a PowerPoint presentation where he goes over a lot of this stuff. And just to warn you, the first hour and 20 minutes, he repeats later. He does the first hour and 20 minutes kind of with the default microphone on his laptop, so it's very muffled. And I was kind of dealing with it. I'm like, oh, it's been a few years. The video's a few years old. I guess he hadn't upgraded to a good microphone yet. Well, no, he discovered his mistake. He switched on his real mic. He was so blown away, he actually started over his whole presentation. So if you want to look at that, it's on Cath Info. It has been summarized, outlined, and transcribed on Cath Info, both the videos. One's called Aether, and the other is called Does Ether Matter? And they're both really good. And so you could learn a lot if you want to go deep into the topic. Of course, he'll tell you some other things you could, where he got his information from. But it is an interesting topic. What else is interesting to me is a lot of mainstream science believers, like in ham radio. There's very few hams who are, young earthers or creationists, or definitely not believing in being flat. There's almost none among ham radio people. Even though they give a lot of evidence, they accidentally give you some evidence that if you're a believer, you're going to be noting things. I'm going to note this for later.
Wouldn't the way the radio works, if they investigated that, wouldn't they at least question some of the quote-unquote science that they're told about the realm?
Well, that's what I was going to say. What interests me the most is the biggest science dupes. They believe in NASA. They own telescopes. They're all totally into science. I've heard them say that they believe in the ether. They're like, I there's nothing else in their beliefs that's anywhere near that department. It's like if you were to plot their beliefs on a chart, everything's over here, and then they got way over here, belief in ether. Because just the fact that they know how radio works and that there has to be something for that radio wave to propagate in. And so they never stop.
Even just to travel the distance it does in certain directions.
How does it propagate if there was absolutely nothing? I mean, how does it just – because they talk about how electromagnetic a radio wave is a combination of electric field and a magnetic field that keeps alternating, and it's kind of self-propagates. But propagates in what? How does it just propagate itself through the open air it just doesn't even make sense.
Or predictably to a certain distance in a certain direction, all these things.
But what fascinated me when I heard that, it took me unawares, to be honest. I did not expect him to say that. He just, as an aside, there's got to be ether. There's no one's going to tell me otherwise. I'm like, really? But he didn't stop and make any conclusions based on that. He didn't say, well, what about Michelson-Morley? Because when that famous experiment happened, the only way it basically proved that the Earth didn't move. And so the only way to salvage the moving Earth was to claim that there was no ether. So
they took that experiment and rather than take the logical conclusion, they took it a totally different direction to serve their purposes.
Yes, again, so all I can really give you today, since we only have a little over an hour, is this bits to look into, some of the takeaways, some of the main points. One of the main points.
What do you have on the screen earlier? I'm outside today because it's quite warm. It's windy, so hopefully that's not a problem through the microphone. I'm kind of hoping this works better than the other. But you had something on the screen, even though I couldn't see it too well. Was that
one of the slides? This is kind of the slideshow he has from his PowerPoint.
Yeah,
he talks about the photon and the particles that make up the atom, and again, he uses their own words. He goes to mainstream sources like the consensus. What does scientism teach? And then he tears it apart. He just tears it a new one, and he does a great job at that. So that's why I recommend him for that. But again, some of the things that you need to know, like the cliff notes, the takeaways, the short version. So Michelson-Morley tried to measure the Earth moving through the ether, and it didn't show no movement. It showed like a quarter of what was necessary. And so basically just like a slight movement of the ether was all it detected. And so they had to throw out the ether as a result. And you know who saved the day? Einstein with the theory of relativity. And you'll never guess one of the official explanations to salvage scientism. What they said, they talked about this Lorentz contraction, whereby the measuring stick expanded just enough to make it look like the Earth wasn't moving or whatever. I mean, it is insane.
I know we could branch off 100 times in this show, but
yes, we could.
Somewhat recently, I came across something. I was talking about Michelson Morley and how basically they took those findings and basically perverted what they really found for their own nefarious means. Like you say, it wasn't that there was no movement; it just wasn't as much as what they were expecting. But they put it forward to the world like there was no movement, ergo XYZ. Somebody else, some other scientist, not that long thereafter, did the same thing, but over the course of decades, like in multiple locations. I mean, like the thoroughness of whatever, I can't remember his name. I wish I could. The thoroughness of what this guy did was incredible. And in fact, Einstein knew who he was. So it was somewhat, contemporary in that window.
Are you talking about Nicholson Gell Pierce?
I don't know the name well enough. All I know is that Einstein basically admitted that if this other guy, if his results are legit, and they are, and they knew that they were, it's like, if this stuff is legit, basically all my stuff is toast. Basically it was like a large scale Michelson Morley was like in one place indoors at one point in time, whereas this guy was like in all kinds of different spots over the course of decades, all different seasons, blah blah blah, and basically got the same kinds of results as Michelson Morley, but proving it to a much greater degree in a way that would support, basically a cosmology that is not what they were trying to sell to us. So they basically just suppressed the heck out of it.
Yeah, I heard that as well. In one of these videos, he talks about how Michelson Morley was recreated in recent times with modern instrumentation. So with all the increases in technology, more accurate, more precise instruments, it came up with the same result. So, yeah, just to hear, though, about how shaky the whole foundation of the whole modern atomic theory, just the whole quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and he talks about how I think this one video, maybe it was the New Age video, the one about
excuse me.
Again, there's a third video I want to recommend. It was the one I called.
The other two that you already posted. This is a third one in addition to those.
Ethereal. Now I have to warn, there is some stuff in there where they are critical of the Catholic faith. There's a couple errors. Like in the first 15 minutes, he goes into like 2 errors and he mentions them. And I was pleasantly surprised by the rest of the video because he talked about how, in fact, there was clips in there, like actual video clips comparing modern particle physics and quantum mechanics and quantum physics with the New Age and with the Hermetic. Hermetic is like the Gnostic and the Hermetic basically means secret or hidden doctrines and stuff. And he compares it with how New Age, how they explain things. And he even had like a table where this is the equivalent of this. This is the equivalent of this. And it was fascinating. In fact, it's been apparently this has been it's in my, well, I think I'm in the wrong it's in the video text subform on Cath Info. It's called Ethereal, The Battle for Heaven and Earth, Cosmology Documentary. And I'm going to bump it right now. Just bump it so it's easily found. I'll just type bump. Now, I said a few words on it. Let me see here. It had some excellent material. For example, Modern atomic theory is right out of the Kabbalah. There are excellent video clips from Michio Kaku, you know, that Japanese scientist,
Yeah.
and other prominent modern physicists saying this very thing with their own mouths. So, I mean, just having those video clips in this video is an invaluable resource.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I don't recommend you give this to your teen kids because it's like viewer discretion advised. There is errors in it, but so much of it is not bad. So much of it is they've done their homework, they've researched, and they've connected it together to show the connection between the modern priesthood, that is, you know, the scientism, with established false religions like, you know, the Kabbalah, which is, you know, it's basically it's from the devil. I mean, we're talking New Age and things like that, and it was very interesting stuff.
Yeah, good old Trumpenstein's a Kabbalist.
Yeah, so you need to understand where this fits in, and in fact, I wonder if I could find it. I probably can't because it was a very long, but I mean, the Tao. Oh yeah, he talked about there's all these books, the Tao of quantum physics. At one point, he had a bunch of books. Oh, here we go. I found it. Okay, I'm going to share this screen because this is just mind blowing. I did not know this. Oh, I shared the wrong one. Okay, okay, let me just share the right one here. It was on. So this is, again, it's on Cath Info. There's AI summary and outline. Then there's the outline of it, occultism and scientific roots, the occult's role in shaping ancient civilizations through magic, astrology, the transmission of forbidden knowledge through secret societies, modern technological and spiritual threats. Okay, so here, look at this. Electromagnetism, light, implosion, meditation, expansion equals expression, polarity is yin yang, spin, like the spin on the atomic particles, that's manifestation, space, that's like the Akashic records, vacuum energy, that's like prana or chi, holographic, that's like omnipresent, fractal, that's like as above so below, fractal feedback, that's like karma. So all these things, it's like repackaged New Age. It's like, you're a little too afraid to jump into New Age. You want to be more scientific. Here, we'll give you a scientific version of New Age where everything just has an equivalent. You know, vortex, that's like chakra. Equilibrium, that's like enlightenment. And all this other stuff. So, particle. By the way, particle from the Latin pater is the father or masculine. Matrix, that's from mater. That's from the mother or feminine. So you see there's all these connections between the words they use in New Age and the same word they use a different set of terms to describe very similar concepts, very similar worldviews in this. Because again, when you leave the realm of science and go into quantum physics, these particle physicists and stuff, that's not science. You are now talking about a whole different realm. Everything's theoretical. It's as theoretical as the ether or anything else, or religion, as far as when it comes to being scientific or measurable. And just knowing that, because how many people would know that? How many people realize just how unscientific this crap is? Because you don't want to confuse science, which is how we built the computer you're using right now. It's like, yeah, computers are real. Computers do a lot of interesting stuff. It's very impressive how they can build these transistors, millions or even billions of them on one chip, and do all these amazing things. But they didn't do that with this particle nonsense. That's not how they did it. And you have to understand that. You have to distinguish between real science, which is measurable, and you can view it, and you can see it, and you can do stuff with it. Again, it's quantifiable and measurable. And when they get in the realm of the theoretical and the speculative, the historical science, how did this layer of rock get here? You weren't there. You did not measure how it happened. You're speculating. And as a matter of fact, when you're talking about the actual scientific evidence, just to give you one example, in the Grand Canyon, there's these areas where the rock bends. It bends up, like the rock was still being formed when the ground pushed up and made the rock just kind of drastically bend.
Yeah.
They inspected that rock. There was one theory that, oh, there was so much pressure, it made it hot, and so it melted, and so that allowed it to bend. Well, all you have to do is take a sample in the place where it bends and check it at a microscopic level. Has it bent? Has it turned igneous? Has it melted a bit from the heat? Guess what? The evidence shows it has not. So game over. Game over for the atheist theory of how the Grand Canyon happened. The Grand Canyon happened very quickly. In fact, you also have these trees going through millions of years of buildup. Because if those little layers formed over millions of years, how did this tree span so many tens of millions of years? Because it froze in upright state, so it passes through several layers. And we saw that happen in the Mount St. Helens eruption of 1980 in the United States. So the scientific evidence actually goes against your theories. So, but again,
sorry, go ahead.
It makes us very comfortable. It makes us very secure in our Catholicism, in our faith, because we know that all these foundations below us are rock solid. The fact that there's a God that created this world, the fact that this earth is 6,000 years old, the fact that God maintains us in this realm and there's a big dome over us. There's obviously a creator up there. All these things keep us that more secure in our faith. So we're not living in two different worlds. We're not juggling. We're not on the fence. We're not. We don't have that. What is it? What's it called? What's that word? The cognitive dissonance. We don't have cognitive dissonance where we're holding two contradictory ideas in our head at once. We're whole. We're more whole. We're integral. We have the whole package at once. So
does he go into the history of the understanding of the ether? Because in the ancient world,
I think so. Yeah, I think
it's basically universally held, and its suppression, massive, widespread, intentional suppression, is, I believe, a fairly modern thing, largely contemporary with, the activities of, say, the money men via their agents like the Rockefellers, and they're taking over medicine. I think you had books on the ether that were far more widespread through the 19th century. Then you get to early 20th, and you get ether gets suppressed, modern education gets taken over, medicine gets totally co-opted, bankrolled by the bad guys, and so certain very important concepts and understandings basically just get cast aside and replaced with an entire new package that they obviously had already come up with.
On that note,
but it used to be pretty darn common, right? I mean, the whole idea of you had earth, air, fire, water, and ether, the fifth element. That was
it was. I think it developed a bit over the ages. I think the concept of it might have changed a little bit over the ages. I don't remember much about those details. What I do know is it was in the realm of philosophy, and they knew it. They didn't claim it was something they measured. And what I found interesting, one of the many things, I mean, I learned dozens of things from this video, and I don't consider myself completely ignorant on this topic, but I learned so much from these videos. And one of the things was Democritus, which I think I learned in high school. He's the one who invented the atom, or came up with the idea of the atom. He was a Greek philosopher, not a scientist. He did not see it with a microscope. He theorized. He was philosophizing, sitting there, drinking his tea, or, smoking, or whatever it is they did, standing around with their robes in the forum or in the Areopagus.
They had nice grapes over there.
Yeah. So, but here's the thing. So he came up with this theory of atoms, and we attribute it to him. He's the first one who came up with it. But no one bats an eye that it was a Greek philosopher with no scientific apparatus, no scientific training, and he turned out to be right about everything being made up of atoms and the whole vacuum of outer space and all this stuff. It turned out to be true. What do you know? This philosopher got it right. Doesn't that make anyone else a bit skeptical? We've embraced a philosophy. This is a philosophy. It's not science. And so I find that
It's
interesting.
also funny. You mentioned a vacuum, and the first thing that pops into my head is the old saying that we all know: nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah.
And yet, you people want us to somehow swallow this idea that, arguably speaking, the vast majority of the area or space, basically most of nature, is a vacuum.
Yeah.
While simultaneously holding, you also want us to adhere to the idea that nature abhors a vacuum. So nature is a vacuum, but it abhors a vacuum. The insanity is, uh, fun times looking at modern thinking and the lies they want us to swallow.
Yeah, they really come. There's a lot of contradictions, and that's what's most interesting to me, because people are going to say, "Oh, you're listening to the wrong guy," or "You shouldn't listen to him. He's a new ager," or "He's wrong," or "He's stupid," or "He's a dummy head." But he's bringing up good questions. It's not open for debate. It's not like I have to trust him. I'm not trusting him about anything. He's bringing up facts and saying, "Did you ever think da 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 da?" I'm like, "You're right. I never thought about that." Why is it that the mainstream view of what reality is, namely that everything's made up of atoms, that was invented or discovered by a Greek philosopher? Since when do we think the Greek philosophers knew anything about anything? They also believed, the Earth was flat. I mean, you seem to dismiss them about that. Or when Aristotle determined that there's only one God, you seem to throw that down the Johnny Flusher. But when it comes to the atomic theory, you're all willing to embrace it in a heartbeat. I mean, there's so many things like that we don't even stop and think about. Just bits here and there that are just like gaping holes in a balloon. It's not holding air. It's just total, like the thing about dark matter. So according to their whole cosmology, there's a certain percent of the universe that has to be this invisible, unmeasurable matter, because otherwise galaxies wouldn't behave as they do. Well, it's like, that means your thing is broken. You got to admit that your whole system is broken and it doesn't work. I mean,
which is also, think about it this way too, Matthew. Even to worry about whether that statement is true or false, the first thing that has to be proved or at least accepted is that there are galaxies whose behavior is even to be considered, right? Galaxies in the sense that they're talking about, which there are not. So their whole discussion is starting with the foundation that requires the acceptance of another huge lie of theirs, and they just build it upon it with more and more huge lies. And it just makes me think of the quote from, I think it was William. I don't know whether his name was William Casey. It really doesn't matter, but he was like the head of CIA or something. Saying that our job will be complete, or we know we will have done our job, however he said it, when everything the American public believes is a lie.
Yeah, I can. That's an interesting thing. Now, I actually believe
every single thing that they lie about it, whether it's from
all been inverted, turned upside down, distorted.
Whether it's this world we're sitting in, or this body that God has given me, or the food that I eat, or my relation to all that, or the events in the world. Everything that propaganda machine has put forward has been put forward precisely to steer us away from the truth, and primarily and ultimately from God, right? That's the goal. Steer you away from God.
It's not for our benefit. Possessing the lie they're selling is not going to do you any favors. It's only going to hurt us. It's going to make us take the faith a little less seriously. We're going to be a little more divided, where we have this Sunday life and then we have the real world life, and we're kind of living this dual, kind of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We have like this double life, living a lie, where we can't decide what's really true. We kind of, I believe in God and believe in heaven and angels and devils, but everything else I believe what the atheists teach. It's like, you're a divided person. Whereas it's so much better if you can be whole, if you can believe everything that connects together and is coherent and fits together and makes sense. Well, so for example, it's good to discover these gaping holes. It's kind of like a movie. A movie isn't one plot hole after another. There are certain plot holes. So if you say this movie is garbage because of these plot holes, you want to zero in on the points that are like the weak spots, like Achilles' heels of this movie. There are certain plot holes. Well, likewise, in their scientism cosmology, the false world or false reality they're trying to sell us, there are certain plot holes or holes in their theory. So, for example, there's the law of conservation of mass and energy. And so when the light particle, they talk about light being a particle, that the light goes through like a glass of water or something, it slows down a bit. But then when it leaves the water, it picks up speed again. So it hits the brakes while it's going through this medium. And then when it gets on the other side, it has to hit the accelerator, put a little bit of gas in the engine, because now we got pick up speed back up to top speed, light speed, right? Whatever the speed of light is. Now, how does that work? How does light, this little particle, which can't be divided to anything smaller, how can it have an accelerator, a brake, a gas can, a gas tank, or any of that stuff? I mean, it doesn't even make sense. It goes against the laws of nature as we know them, namely the conservation of momentum, conservation of mass and energy, all that kind of stuff. So their own system, and see, they have all this woo-woo stuff like light is a particle and it's a wave. And they talk about, in fact, Whitsitt talks about this, how they have this double slit experiment, and how if you don't observe it, then it's still both. And he basically says, and he didn't say it, but the scientism priests, the priests of this false religion, actually teach that the wave somehow is sentient. It knows if you're looking at it or not. And if you're looking at it, it goes back in time and goes through the one slit, so it's a particle. But if you're not looking at it, it goes back in time and goes through the other slit and it stays a wave. Nonsense like that. I mean, you're assigning sentience to this particle. I mean, we're talking.
Well, either way, I mean, if space is a vacuum, how would light even get to anywhere from this? Let's say the sun's X million miles away. Nothing's traveling through a vacuum.
Yeah, and this whole spontaneous action at a distance and all that quantum entanglement, all that kind of stuff. How could you have particles affect each other when there is nothing in between them? Not even, because remember, it's not like, well, maybe it'll just send a light signal. No. Light to them is a photon. So this particle would have to have a photon it could shoot out, and it doesn't have one. So how can this ball, affect this ball over here when there's absolutely nothing in between them? It doesn't even make sense. But again, you have to meditate on this. You have to philosophize. You have to think about it. You have to use your rational brain to apply logic to what they're teaching and realize that it's all a bunch of nonsense. Again, not everything they say falls apart, though. Some of it internally holds together. Like once you accept this, kind of like a conceit in a movie or in a book, you have what's called a conceit. It's like once you accept this foundation, everything else makes sense. In fact, when they wrote the original Star Trek, my understanding, my wife was telling me her science teacher was fascinated by how they created Star Trek. All they had to do was have a certain few conceits or things you had to have as a given, and then the whole rest of the universe could be logically built on top of it. So it all kind of hung together. So once you accept that there's this thing called subspace, and you could have this warp drive and whatever, and it's like they had to make one or two different leaps of science, and if you could just accept that, just say, okay, that happened, then the rest of the show would be kind of pseudo-scientific. It would actually kind of hang together. And that's kind of how the whole system works. A lot of it does hang together if you accept that there's these things called atoms and et cetera, and that there was a big bang that made them fly off and start spinning and all this other stuff. Internally, just like a lot of heresies, internally it hangs together. That's how modernism is, by the way.
Sure, I was about to say modernism. A lot of your philosophers that are presently considered great, the modern ones like Kant, Hegel. Like Hegel, okay, brilliant man, naturally speaking. Like God gave him a very high level of intelligence. A lot of those modern philosophers whose philosophy overall it's false, but as a system, it's massive and complicated, and within itself, it hangs together. It's just
Yeah.
wrong, you know.
That's probably one of the biggest things I still remember. You know, when you study something 20 years ago or 25 years ago, you forget a lot of the details. But that's one of the things I remember from my study at the seminary about modernism from Bishop Williamson.
Yeah,
was the fact that it's complex. They don't want you to know how well it all hangs together. They want to act like it's all spontaneous discovery. That it's all just
right.
what do you know? I discovered this, but actually internally it all hangs together and it's applied to historical scriptural.
I mean, that's why Pascendi is such a brilliant document, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
takes.
exactly.
Now, granted, the document is not exactly the easiest thing. You're not going to pick it up.
It's not. Yeah, you have to have a guide.
Read it. You're not going to pick it up and read it in an afternoon. Cool. Now I get it. But the very fact that St. Pius X and probably some theological buddies of his, if you will, you know, put it together and broke it down so clearly and wonderfully was itself stunning.
Yeah, he shone a light on it. He showed how the fundamental error of modernism develops itself, and almost like a bad seed that grows out into all these different bad fruits, how it applies to scripture, the liturgy, the faith, and everything. It dissolves and destroys everything it touches. But if you want to be a modernist, you can redefine all the elements of the Catholic faith in modernist terms. And it all kind of hangs together. There's not internal contradictions. The problem is the fundamental thing you started with. And yeah, again, anyone out there who has not studied Pascendi or modernism, what I recommend, whatever your background, whether you're intellectual or you're just a common, a worker or housewife or whatever, I recommend you need a guide, you need a priest to kind of guide you through it. I would recommend Bishop Williamson's very brilliant videos.
You make some videos or something?
Okay. There's been several of his classes that have been recorded. He has these nice outlines that he goes over by outline. So he kind of shows as a breaking it down by subject, how modernism breaks down into these 8 different areas or whatever. And he goes into how it applies and how it develops into these different areas, how it corrupts the different departments of the faith. And so by
there's also a little book called The Catechism of Modernism. Thomas Nelson republished it.
I think it was called A Brief Catechism of Modernism, maybe.
Yeah, this is a little yellow one,
Yeah, I don't remember what was in that. I might have read that, but it was so long ago, I don't remember how good it was.
Basically, if I recall, it's a priest, right? A learned priest. I believe what it is, he took Pascendi and just kind of broke it down into catechetical form, just making it a lot more easier to digest. It's been a long time since I leafed through
found it. Yeah, I'm going to share the screen here in a second. I'm going to.
But it's a great place to start. If you don't, the average person is not going to want to slog through Pascendi itself. If you do, great. It's definitely worthwhile. But this is also the Catechism of Modernism. Yeah, that's even if you do want to read Pascendi, this isn't a bad idea to have this at your side table, at the same time, just because it can help you digest some bits of it maybe a little bit more easily.
So I think we all need to know. The fact is, we need to be inoculated against the modern errors. Now, I'm not a big believer in, I don't believe much in vaccines. I have my doubts about germ theory completely. I haven't really studied that very much. I know more about vaccines being bad than I know about, what is it called, a terrain theory instead of germ theory. Yeah. And that's an interesting topic. And that's one thing I haven't really spent much time on. But I will say there's a lot of errors. We need to know. I believe that the idea of inoculating yourself against errors, that is valid. Okay, so to know about the error, to know why it's wrong, that prepares you against it. That is a very valid way of dealing with error. That's what great bishops did for their flocks. For example, Bishop Antonio Castro Meyer in Brazil, he inoculated his people against the coming flood of Vatican II. And what do you know? There was a lot more survivors there because he taught them about modernism. He taught them about what was happening in Vatican II so that they didn't fall for it. So again, we need to make sure we're inoculated against these various errors of feminism and modernism and Americanism and evolution and scientism and the globism and outer the whole scientism package and all the various heresies. We have to know now. Some of us need to know more of it than others. I mean, if you have children, you need to know these errors because if your kids or have friends, they might have some of these errors. You got to recognize them when you see them. And, sometimes you might be able to say, okay, I'm just a housewife. I have to take care of these children. I can't study all this stuff. But maybe make sure your husband knows about it so he can, teach the older kids about it or something. I mean, we need to know this stuff because we're swimming in errors. And error is very destructive. It has a real effect on your actual decision and what you believe and then what you act out on. And what you're going to do with your time and where you're going to send your kids to school and what you're going to do with your life. I mean, ideas matter. I mean, any wise man will tell you ideas matter. So bad ideas, AKA errors, they're going to have bad fruit. They're going to have you do the wrong thing. You're going to go into the wrong career. You're going to, send your kids into the military and then you're going to have problems there. I mean, if you don't know what the enemy is doing, if you don't know that you're at war, you're going to fall for all kinds of nonsense. You're going to be duped into doing stupid things. And so we need to, every error needs to be known about and fought against and countered with the equivalent truth. So the more truth you have, the more powerful you are, the more solid you stand on God's truth and God's reality. You have more and more foundation rock underneath you that you're not going to be moved. And that's why I collect truth like Pokemon. I love the truth. The more truth you have, the more solid you are. And
speaking of truth, where the ether is concerned, do the videos go into it all, like the fact that, for example, there's a reason why you can pull electricity from all around you, like
yes.
And things like the fact that electricity is everywhere, including in you. You actually emit a biofield in the one general sense, but also your heart, your mind actually have separate ones, or they have two parts of the one that are detectable with modern instruments. Then you have plasma. I mean, I remember seeing the clip from that scientist in, I think it was the 50s, or the clip is from the 60s, but he referring to his own work from the 50s, saying that the moon is plasma. And I don't think they ever really heard from him again. But like there's a new technology it's called the Tesla machine, and it utilizes plasma, and it basically is healing just about any condition, cancer, chronic this or that. Somebody's had pain for decades in a part of their body, has a couple of treatments with the machine generates or pulls plasma. I think, I don't know how it works, but sends it out through two bulbs, and you basically position them on your body, and it will put what is wrong correct in your body.
Yeah, there's the most, at least to me, the most.
Yeah. And that also touches upon another gentleman who is heavily suppressed, called Dr. Royal Raymond Rife, I think. And he invented a machine in the early 20th century, and he cured cancer in 16 out of 16 people. And what his machine did, he basically discovered that everything around us and within us has a certain frequency. And if if you can figure out what they are, like if you can figure out the frequency, for example, of cancer, you can zero in on it and destroy it by an implement that will radiate the proper frequency. And that's what he did with 100% success. He was out in California, got highly celebrated initially by the circle that knew what he was doing. But then once the big boys found out what happened, they crushed him. And most of the people that were at the dinner to celebrate his achievement acted like they never met the man. All the stuff that he had built up, they stole or destroyed, very much like Tesla. I think he ended up becoming a heavy drinker just because they basically ruined his life. And I'm not saying that's acceptable, but it's understandable.
Yeah, I should probably read this quote.
Royal Raymond Rife. Yeah, it's Rife. But you can buy now. There are machines. They're not super widespread. They're not cheap, but they're cheaper than they could be. And frankly, they're a hell of a lot cheaper than almost anybody watching pays or has ever paid for health insurance. And you pay that much each. Like the Tesla machine is still just a shade over $10,000, which sounds like a lot because I don't have $10,000 in my pocket. But relative to modern medical costs, it is practically free.
Yeah.
And the stories about healing with it are insane. If you look at the world in which we know, what they tell us about what disease is and what can heal things, which is all, of course, part of the overall package of lies. But same thing with the Rife machine. And it's also fairly important to keep in mind that they know that frequency is of vast importance. That's part of how they're able to do what they do in the world. And that's, if we don't even know that that's what they're doing, it becomes extremely difficult to protect yourself.
Yeah, it's to our disadvantage. Yeah, we don't even know what they're doing. Let me read the quote here from Tesla for the transcription later, and anyone who's just listening to it in audio only. Tesla said, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." Yeah. And to answer your question, Nikola Tesla believed in the ether, and a lot of his discoveries actually required.
Right. He didn't just believe in it; he knew it and worked with it.
Now, why do we make that distinction? What does it matter if he? Because some discoveries don't have anything to do with certain beliefs. So, for example, sometimes people will say, "Oh, you believe the Earth is flat? Well, get off your computer then, because your computer was created with science, and science says the Earth is a spinning ball, and therefore." Implying that all the discoveries of lithography and everything they use to etch out the transistors in a microscopic way, that requires knowledge of a spinning ball Earth to have done that. It's like, no, it didn't. It had nothing to do with that. That is two different kinds of science. Believing in a spinning ball, that's more of a religion, that you're taking their word for it. You're believing in the NASA priests. You're believing in all these high priests to tell you all this nonsense. Whereas the other kind of science is more like the microscope and the measuring devices, the actual measurable, repeatable experiments, and, hard science. And so you can't confuse those two. So Tesla, he discovered a lot of his things only because he knew about the ether and the true nature of the world. So what's interesting is how little things have developed. Electrical theory or electricity, how much has our electricity developed since 1930? Really not at all. We have these motors, you have the generators, the moving magnets and coiled copper wire, magnetic field moving through it, generates electricity, alternating current, comes to transformers, gets stepped down, comes into my house. That's the same as it was in 1950. Things haven't really developed. So the people
it's all totally unnecessary, right?
It's like the people who invented electricity, all this cool stuff, believed in the ether. Then we dropped the ether, and then things kind of stopped developing.
Well, and so it's interesting you mentioned the way what we are given access to functions. because what we are given access to is not what Tesla was even talking about or invented himself. That was more, uh, what was it, Thomas Edison?
Well, yeah,
I
I think
mean,
they were.
basically, because what if we took what Tesla actually demonstrated and proved, and what the big boys still know to this day, but what they suppressed for us, all of the uh, gizmos we use, all of the various energy that we utilize that we get wired in, the wiring in part is totally unnecessary. If you go by the way Tesla, like everything could and should have been wireless from the beginning. However, if you do that, it's free. And it also makes living as a free man a lot easier. But they
Yes.
don't want that, right? So all this ugly wired network and all the pollution of various things that a lot of the ways they do it produces was a choice by the machine, if you will, for the main reason of control, right? Because we're going to set up life to where you get these advantages, you come to depend upon them, but to get them, you have to depend upon us and you have to pay us. Whereas everything about, the alternative, the proper way, what Tesla was pointing to, was free and would always be free. It's not something that you could actually, if you took the core knowledge of what he was talking about and shared it with the world, you actually could not uh, commoditize that. And the idea of having certain things be free is so antithetical to the people that want to dominate the world, right? We live in 2026. It's a time when they want to commoditize everything. The air that I'm breathing, the sun, the water. They want to charge you for everything. They feel like, breathing, having water is not a human right. I'm like, you people are so insane. It blows my mind that you still have a job or that you are still free to walk about the world, because it's preposterous.
Yeah, and this kind of ties in with what we talked about a few weeks ago about the like those World's Fairs. I mean,
Yeah,
just the fact that they had so many light bulbs, and this is when most cities did not have electricity yet. And they
right.
just threw together this generator for these 100,000 light bulbs. I mean, I don't think they were using the kind of generator we have today. I think they were doing something else. I
Yeah.
mean, it's amazing. And then, of course, there's the whole topic, another rabbit hole is all the bells that had a certain frequency that probably gave you some kind of health, probably had some
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
health effect.
The bells were and the material they were made out of, the frequencies at which they vibrated. And of course, they're usually put atop some kind of structure, often a cathedral, but not always. And then I think we talked about it briefly, but the gargoyles, we've been told, oh yeah, those were the water spouts, which is nonsense. I mean, they actually inside they themselves had a structure which was not conducive to water flowing, or at least that clearly wasn't the purpose. But the bell would ring, and then those were basically amplifiers and directed amplifiers down to the townsfolk, actually, basically, right? And it would actually bring a very beneficial kind of a vibration and frequency to the atmosphere that helped to elevate. Um,
In
I'm not
fact,
saying that ringing the bell is going to make you a saint. I'm just saying that there's a reason why even just being around inside or even just around a lovely church, especially if the bell's still intact and all that, can bring a certain feeling of peace. You know, even if you're in a dark place, you'll be slightly better. If you're in a good place, you'll be even better. It's one of the it's physical benefit that you cannot actually undo.
I mean, I don't
except
think
of course by getting rid of the bells.
I don't think it's illogical that the church would do things that are helpful on the natural level as well as the supernatural. In fact, it almost makes more
I think
sense.
it's totally consistent, and the only thing that would be illogical is if they didn't. You know,
Yeah, I mean, if a doctor were to take care of you and he's not just helping you physically, but say he also eased your mind mentally and your emotions, emotionally and psychologically, or maybe even did something to make sure your spiritual self was in order, wouldn't that be more that kind of a holistic care for a person? If you care about this person, you want them to be feeling and be at ease. Wouldn't you go for all those things, not just focus on the physical? I mean, that actually makes sense to me. For someone,
well,
it would be
especially if
for
you're
someone who's
operating from
holistic.
a principle, especially if you're operating from that wholesome, historic, if you will, natural principle of our being, although a composite being is a unified composite.
Yeah, I mean, why would the church just have beautiful Gregorian chant and sanctifying grace and not also want to have this bell which on a
Sure.
natural level soothes your body to make, well, it's like the whole nature and supernature.
Well, that's why she
Supernature
blesses
lands on
food,
nature.
right?
You need nature to be in
Yeah,
order for supernature to do its thing.
grace
So
builds
the
on
church,
nature.
and why would the church want us to go to heaven forever? What the ultimate good for us, but not care if we are emotionally and mentally soothed by things like the right frequency of bells or Gregorian chant or whatever. I
Well, I
mean,
mean, that's why
wouldn't
she
that
has
be?
us bring, you know, you have those consoling, blessings for food, for example. You bring food to the church. Think of a small village, right? Which is what most of the world was before. It's like after the harvest, bring food, blessed. You know, um, the church is concerned about all the little things that we use that are even merely natural. I mean, if you open up the Recolta, there's all kinds of prayers for what you might just call basic, mundane aspects
Yeah,
of our life here. Because although they are not the end all be all, they are part of the bigger picture to help us in this world to obtain that goal. Just like the whole idea that, you know, you need a certain sufficiency of material goods to live a virtuous life. Well, you want to live a virtuous life so you can obtain heaven. You know, um,
that was
so
actually in
material,
the epistles
you
too.
need material goods. You need to eat, you need clothing.
One of the apostles, and I don't remember which epistle, but he actually said that it's ridiculous to say, "Be ye filled," and then do nothing to fill them. Saying,
Right,
"Oh, God bless you, may you be filled with bread," and then proceed to give him nothing. It's like
right.
that doesn't help him any. So why would the church say, "Oh, I love you," may you be blessed, and then not care at all if they have shelter or food in their belly or anything? That would be ridiculous, right? You'd say you're a hypocrite. You don't really care about that person. So, of course, the church is going to be holistic in its concern for us. So, but again, this is a potential error because you have documentaries that maybe stumble on this truth about things like bells or the shape of these towers, that maybe they were harvesting some kind of electricity out of the air and doing something with it. And they conclude that these were power plants, man. These weren't churches, these were power plants. No, maybe they were both. I mean, maybe the church used to know this stuff, and maybe this is
Sure.
kind of like lost knowledge.
Well, I
Because
mean, look, just to make the gargoyle interior required some kind of fairly serious knowledge that simply was possessed at that time in a way that we are unaware and most people are ignorant of now. Um, even just like you said, making the bell, out of the right material to ring. I mean, think about how big those bells are. To make them at the proper frequency, it's got to require a pretty decent amount of skill. Um, and I think like many other things, when you look into them, I think stuff like that indicates that, our fathers had a great deal more knowledge and useful experience of a lot of things in this world than we've ever been told or we realize or appreciate. And that part of the lie of our times is the lie that we are somehow superior to anybody that came before us,
Yeah.
frankly, in any way whatsoever, but particularly, you know, where it comes to understanding reality. Whereas reality is we are supremely ignorant. Now, granted, a lot of that ignorance has been forced, if you will, in the sense that, like, the machine has taken over so thoroughly and, suppressed various things like the Tesla stuff, right? I mean, you've got a very great case study there of a brilliant guy who basically gets blackballed, all of his info gets stolen. You know, they basically totally memory hold the whole idea of the ether, right? I mean, there are a few people talking about it, but I mean, there was a century there where they basically just memory hold that one, and it's a vital concept. So, the fact that we think we're so smart, but we're truly so ignorant, it's not 100% on us. Now, it is if we remain ignorant once we start to see these things. It's a shame, and it's unfortunate, and obviously it leads to much greater trouble, right? Because A, it's untrue, and B, it tends to be predicated upon pride, which never helped anybody individually or collectively. Um, so, but the reality is, our fathers, uh, they they built the world that is so solid that even these folks who want to tear it down can barely even begin to do that. It takes them a lot longer to tear it down just because their own knowledge and, frankly, their own strength of will and just strength, period, is not really up to the task.
Yeah. Well, looks like we've come up on
Our
our
window.
usual end of our the usual length of our episode, so we should probably
Okay.
wrap it up here.
Alrighty. Well, it's been a pleasure. I mean, we, digressed a little, as if that's a shock.
Yeah.
A couple of Irish guys talking about stuff. But, we're going to digress, and that's just the way it is. But anyway, it's been a pleasure, Matthew.
Yep, likewise.
Everybody, who knows? I mean, it's mid-July. There's still a lot of stuff going on out there. I see no reason to think this fuel situation is going to get resolved, or they're even really trying to resolve it. I think it's all theater. That's part of the continued, dissolution of the world. Like I was just talking about, right? Like our forefathers built something very solid. They're trying to destroy it.
Yeah.
And one of the ways they're going to do it in this phase is to seriously affect our access to energy through the channel that, of course, they created and have controlled. You know, the sad part, of course, is that we don't even need oil, which isn't even a fossil fuel, but that's another discussion. Um, but at the moment, we do just because that's how it's been arranged. But we'll see. It's mid-July. Could be some very interesting times very, very soon. But depends on how they want to play it out, right?
Yeah. Next, I guess next week we'll probably want to talk a bit about this resurgence going on over in Iran. Trump seems to be firing that whole conflict back up. They've been going back and forth several times now already, and Iran.
Isn't he talking about being like on an assassination list or something?
I don't know. I haven't heard anything about that, but I do know that there's been several volleys each direction from the Iranian side and the American side. And of course,
Well, I mean, it may mean nothing. It may come to nothing, but I mean, what is today? The 14th?
today's the 13th.
13th. The 19th is Sunday, and it's the World Cup final. And I only mention that because it's the most popular sport in the world. um, if there's going to be any kind of false flag, I realize they already started the conflict, and historically they've used false flags to get the support to start a conflict. But doesn't mean they can't work a massive false flag in to garner, new support for a bigger wave or whatever. So, an event like that's not just got, say, 100,000 people in one stadium, but that is the most, viewed thing in the world. I think it's only every 4 years, but I think it's always the most viewed event just because so much of the world follows the sport. And it's in New York, right? And it's in the Meadowlands.
I would not be going there. I would not want to be in that crowd. Just in case, I would not want to be in that crowd.
Yeah, so, just keep your wits about you. I don't know if anything's going to happen, but if it does, don't be surprised. Stay calm. Get close and stay close to God, and be a solid member of your family, whatever role you happen to play in it. And hopefully, we'll see you next week.
Yep. See you guys then.
All right. Well, God bless everybody. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.